Australians love mocking Singapore. It is practically a recreational sport. Too small, too clean, too strict, too soulless. A city that looks like a spreadsheet learned how to smile. And yet somehow, the same Australians who sneer at it are quietly updating their resumes at 1 a.m, toggling open to work, and Googling phrases like Singapore expat tax rate and how CPF works for foreigners. A miracle of modern hypocrisy. Publicly, Singapore is that weird island with rules. Privately, it is a very interesting career opportunity. This chapter is about that gap, the gap between mockery and migration, between sarcasm and salary, between laughing at a place and desperately needing what it offers. Australians mock Singapore because it does not flatter their national self-image. Australia likes space. Singapore likes density. Australia likes irony. Singapore likes efficiency. Australia likes pretending money does not matter while quietly tracking house prices like a heart monitor. Singapore, meanwhile, does not pretend. It just asks one rude question. What is your productivity, and can you prove it? That question terrifies people who grew up believing lifestyle is an economic policy. Australians tell themselves Singapore is boring. What they mean is Singapore does not subsidise underperformance with vibes. In Singapore, capital is not embarrassed to exist. Money walks outside in daylight. Real estate prices are discussed openly, brutally, without moral hand-wringing. Stock markets are not treated like casinos for bored retirees, but as infrastructure. Funds move because returns exist, not because someone feels optimistic after a long lunch. Australians mock that because it feels confrontational. It holds up a mirror and asks why a country rich in land, resources and time still struggles to convert effort into capital velocity. So Australians laugh. They call it a village. They call it sterile. They call it authoritarian. Then they apply. They apply because salaries in Singapore do not come with a sermon. They come with numbers, net numbers, after-tax numbers, numbers that still mean something after rent. They apply because Singapore does not pretend housing is a moral right while inflating it into a speculative nightmare. It simply admits housing is an asset class, regulates it ruthlessly, and moves on. No illusions, no fairy tales, just math and enforcement. Australians mock Singapore's property prices while ignoring that those prices are connected to global capital flows, sovereign funds, REIT structures, and a government that treats real estate as a strategic industry, not a political bribe. Mockery is easier than analysis. They apply because Singapore's financial ecosystem is not ashamed of itself. Asset managers talk openly about yields. Family offices are not whispered rumours, but official migration categories. Wealth is not hidden behind cultural guilt. It is structured, taxed, and reinvested. Australians, by contrast, live in a country where everyone pretends to hate investors while voting to protect them, where housing speculation is both condemned and sacred, where superannuation grows enormous yet remains psychologically invisible, like a dragon sleeping under the floorboards. Singapore scares Australians because it is honest. It says, if you are skilled, you will be paid. If you are average, you will be replaced. If you are unproductive, you will be invisible. Australians mock that because it removes the comforting fog. No long lunches to hide behind. No endless meetings about culture. No illusion that lifestyle is a substitute for competitiveness. And yet, when Australian professionals hit their late 30s or 40s, something shifts. Mortgages harden. Career ladders narrow, promotions slow. Suddenly, lifestyle does not pay school fees, sunsets do not compound, coffee does not outperform inflation. That is when Singapore stops being soulless and starts being strategic. They do not move because they love Singapore. They move because Singapore loves capital, and capital loves clarity. This is the part nobody admits out loud. Singapore is not attractive because it is fun. It is attractive because it is legible. You can see where the money flows. You can see who wins. You can see the rules. You may not like them, but at least they exist. Australians mock Singapore to protect their pride. Applying for jobs there threatens the story they tell themselves about being relaxed, superior, and effortlessly prosperous. But pride does not pay dividends, so they mock. then they apply, then they pretend it was always part of the plan. And before going further into this uncomfortable truth, do the algorithmic ritual. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. This is not charity, it is portfolio allocation. Attention compounds, so does ignorance. Australians love the word lifestyle. They say it the way investors say moat, except lifestyle does not generate cash flow, it generates excuses. For years, lifestyle worked. Cheap money covered the gap. Rising house prices acted like a silent second salary. Superannuation numbers went up, so nobody asked what productivity looked like underneath. Australia felt rich without having to be sharp. Then inflation arrived, not dramatically, not with sirens, just enough to make everything irritating. Groceries crept up, insurance spiked, mortgage rates woke up from their decade-long coma. Suddenly, lifestyle stopped feeling like freedom and started feeling like exposure. That is when Singapore enters the Australian conversation again, quietly, reluctantly, with spreadsheets. Australians mock Singapore's cost of living, which is funny because Australians have been paying Singapore prices with Australian wages and pretending that beaches count as compensation. Singapore is expensive in a way that is at least honest. Australia is expensive in a way that pretends to be casual. In Singapore, high rent comes with low taxes, global career leverage, and proximity to capital. In Australia, high rent comes with the privilege of saying, at least it's not crowded. At some point, people start doing math. They notice that Singapore salaries are quoted in after-tax reality, not lifestyle fantasy. They notice that bonuses actually correlate with performance instead of calendar years. They notice that equity compensation exists outside Silicon Valley myths. They also notice something else. Singapore treats finance like infrastructure. Australia treats it like a necessary evil. In Singapore, finance is not something you apologize for at dinner parties. Asset management, private banking, family offices, REITs, commodities trading, FX desks, shipping finance, structured products. These are not fringe activities, they are the engine. Australia, meanwhile, built a national identity on digging things out of the ground and selling houses to each other. That worked until capital mobility became global and money stopped caring about geography or nostalgia. Singapore understands this. Capital is not emotional. Capital is allergic to inefficiency. Capital wants speed, clarity, and enforceable rules. Singapore offers that with the enthusiasm of a country that knows exactly why it exists. Australians mock Singapore's obsession with money because it feels vulgar. What they really dislike is that Singapore forces them to confront their own dependency on asset inflation rather than income growth. Australia's wealth story relies heavily on property appreciation. Singapore's relies on cash flow, financial services, and constant reinvention. One is passive and politically fragile. The other is exhausting but durable. So when inflation exposes the cracks, Australians start browsing Singapore job boards just to see. They frame it as curiosity. They call it an experiment. They tell friends they would never actually move there. They lie. They apply because Singapore offers something Australia increasingly struggles with: career continuity. In Singapore, changing jobs does not mean starting over socially or professionally. The market is compact, ruthless, and liquid. If you are useful, someone knows it within weeks. In Australia, careers stretch horizontally. Titles inflate. Responsibilities blur. Pay stagnates politely. You are encouraged to be patient, while the system quietly caps you. Singapore does not do patience. It does throughput. That terrifies people who built their self-image on being relaxed rather than competitive. But it excites anyone who realizes time is the one asset you cannot refinance. Australians mock Singapore's intensity until they realize intensity is how returns are generated. Then intensity starts to look like discipline. Discipline starts to look like safety. This is the unspoken pivot. Lifestyle works until it collides with math. When that happens, People stop asking which country feels nicer and start asking which system compounds. Singapore compounds. Aggressively, intentionally, without apology. And before the next chapter pulls this even further apart, perform the sacred ritual again. Like the video. Subscribe. Not because you agree, but because attention is capital and this channel invests it better than denial. There is a moment every Australian professional reaches where the jokes about Singapore stop being funny. It usually happens after the third spreadsheet. Spreadsheet 1 compares gross salaries. Australia still looks fine. Spreadsheet 2 adjusts for tax. Things get uncomfortable. Spreadsheet 3 factors in housing, childcare, transport, and how much of your income is quietly being incinerated just to stay in place. That is when the laughter dies. Australians love mocking Singapore's obsession with money, but they are remarkably sensitive when someone calculates their own. There is a national discomfort with looking too closely at the numbers, as if scrutiny itself is unpatriotic. Singapore has no such anxiety. It shows you the bill up front. Taxes are clear. Deductions are limited. Rules are enforced. You know exactly what the government takes and what it leaves you with. No mythology, no vibes-based budgeting. Australia, on the other hand, runs on polite ambiguity. The tax system is complex enough to feel fair, while quietly punishing labour and rewarding leverage. Property speculation is culturally sacred, even as it drains productivity from everything else. Superannuation grows in the background, which is convenient because nobody wants to admit how dependent retirement has become on markets behaving nicely forever. Singapore does not ask markets to behave nicely, it structures them. Capital markets in Singapore are designed for circulation. Money moves fast because friction is treated as a failure, not a tradition. Real estate is regulated not to be affordable in the abstract, but to remain functional as a financial asset without imploding the social contract. Australians mock Singapore's rules because they feel strict. What they really resent is enforcement. Australia prefers moral lectures to hard constraints. Singapore prefers hard constraints and skips the lecture. This difference shows up brutally in careers. In Singapore, finance is not a dirty word. If you work in asset management, wealth advisory, trading, or structured finance, you are not treated like someone who accidentally wandered into polite society. You are treated like part of the machine that keeps the country relevant. In Australia, finance exists in an awkward limbo. Everyone benefits from it. Nobody wants to admit how central it is. Mining executives are tolerated. Property developers are resented. Bankers are quietly blamed for everything while being essential to the entire system functioning. Singapore avoids this hypocrisy by being explicit. Wealth creation is the national strategy. Everything else supports it. This clarity is what pulls Australians in, even as they pretend to despise it. They apply for Singapore jobs because the compensation structures make sense. Base pay is not an insult. Bonuses are not mythical. Equity is not a rumour. Performance is rewarded without pretending it was destiny. They apply because Singapore's proximity to capital means decisions happen faster, deals close faster, careers move faster. Failure is not cushioned, but success is not throttled either. Australia, by contrast, cushions everything. Failure is softened. Success is moderated. The result is stability that slowly erodes ambition. Australians tell themselves Singapore is too intense. What they mean is Singapore does not slow down to protect their comfort. And here is the part nobody likes admitting. Australians are not applying to Singapore because they want adventure. They are applying because they want leverage. They want exposure to capital flows that actually matter. They want their effort to connect to outcomes that scale beyond one city, one market, one housing cycle. Singapore offers that because it was built to. Australia was built to be comfortable. Singapore was built to survive. When global capital tightens, comfort becomes expensive. Survival becomes attractive. So Australians mock Singapore one last time just to preserve dignity. Then they submit the application. Then they wait very quietly for the recruiter to reply. Before we get to the final chapter where this contradiction fully collapses, do the algorithmic housekeeping. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. This is not enthusiasm, it is asset allocation. This is where the story finishes pretending. Australians do not move to Singapore because they suddenly fall in love with hawker centres or skyline photos. They move because the joke stops working. At some point, mockery becomes expensive. They realise Australia's economic model is no longer quietly generous, it is openly narrow. A country that relies on property inflation, resource exports, and population growth eventually runs out of excuses. When productivity stalls, lifestyle stops feeling earned and starts feeling borrowed. Singapore does not borrow its prosperity from the future, it bills the present. That is the final, uncomfortable difference. Singapore forces every adult to confront the relationship between effort, capital, and outcome in real time. Australia delays that confrontation with comfort, distance, and optimism. Australians mock Singapore's rules until they realise rules protect returns. They mock Singapore's intensity until they realise intensity is how small systems survive large competitors. They mock Singapore's obsession with money until they realise money is the language global systems actually speak. Then comes the quiet surrender, the visa paperwork, the recruiter calls, the offer letter that looks slightly higher than expected, the tax calculation that looks much higher than hoped. Suddenly, Singapore is not soulless. It is efficient, not authoritarian, but predictable, not small, but strategic. This is not hypocrisy, it is adaptation. People do not owe loyalty to systems that stop working for them. They owe loyalty to their future balance sheet, their children's options, their own remaining time. Singapore understands this brutal truth. That is why it keeps winning migration battles without begging anyone to come. It does not sell dreams, it sells frameworks. Frameworks for finance, frameworks for real estate, frameworks for capital protection and accumulation. Australia still sells lifestyle, even as the invoice grows. So Australians mock Singapore one last time, usually at a barbecue or in a comment section. Then they pack carefully. They bring irony with them like a security blanket. They promise they will not become like that. They always do, because systems shape behaviour faster than culture ever will. Singapore does not convert Australians by persuasion. It converts them by payroll. And once converted, they rarely move back for economic reasons. They move back for nostalgia, or family, or because they made enough money to afford sentimentality again. That is the cycle. Mock, apply, move, justify it later. If this video made you uncomfortable, good. That means it touched capital reality, not national mythology. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Not because you agree, because understanding systems before they understand you is the only real edge left.